All right, so welcome to the latest episode of Blood Money. Today, I'm very happy to announce that we have a very special guest named Jeff Younger. How are you doing, sir?
I'm well. How you doing, Vem?
Great. Jeff has been really on the forefront of what's been happening with the family law courts, and essentially how the family law courts, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, but based upon what we've observed, there's a lot of kidnapping, trafficking. There's a lot of removing children from loving parents, putting children in the hands of abusive parents. And really what we see in society today is a byproduct of a lot of that kind of mindset, which is that the father is removed from the family. A lot of these children grow up in single families. The statistics actually show that fathers are much better at raising children. This is an actual fact. We've seen this in terms of the children being raised in a way that they have good mental health. Their future is better prepared. A good father versus a good mother. A lot of the time, good fathers are really what it takes. And this is something that our courts do not follow. A lot of single moms are made in these family courts. I think there's something like 22 million fathers that don't even see their children. Yeah. Now, you look at what's happening in society with the Antifas, with the levels of depression being higher than ever before. And I say this is my opinion, that third wave feminism is the reason why we're here right now, why our society and culture is literally falling apart because men are said to be toxic, fathers are removed from the lives of their children. And that is exactly what's happening with Jeff Younger. Real quickly, Jeff Younger came to the forefront because he was trying to protect his son James from having a sex change, which his ex-wife was trying to force upon the son. And from what I understand, this child is only 5-6 years old, and you have a mom here that is trying her best to castrate this child. So, Jeff, for people that don't know your story, just let's dive right into it. Bring us up to speed on everything that's happened to you via the family courts and the nonsense that you've been putting up with and the nonsense that your son James has been putting up with.
Yeah, so I have two sons, James and Jude. When my son turned 2 years old, while I was still married to my ex-wife, she began to try to transition him to a girl. And when I resisted this, she filed for divorce, forced me out of the house. She's a pediatrician and used her relationships with licensed care providers to force me out of the house. And then she began to actively teach my son that he was actually a girl. If you go out onto YouTube and you just search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl," you'll see him just past his 3rd birthday explaining to me that he believes he's a girl because his mom's telling him he is. That was the first time I knew. That was actually the first iPhone video I ever took. It scared the bejesus out of me. And I just assumed in Texas that the courts would put a stop to this and that it would be easy for me to get a law against chemically and physically castrating kids. But instead, what happened was the courts consistently upheld her end of the bargain. I did get a judgment in 2019, which gave me 50-50 custody, no child support, and a check on all medical procedures because the courts kind of saw that she was acting way outside of her bounds and was dangerous to James. But then the corrupt establishment in the Texas judiciary, in an amazing thing, transferred my case to another court. And they never implemented the jury verdict, which gave me 50-50 custody. And then in this new court, the 301st District Court, under Judge Mary Brown in Dallas County, I call her Judge Bloody Mary Brown, she systematically stripped me of all my parental rights using temporary orders. And temporary orders in Texas are not appealable. So there's really no defense when these judges do these things. And I lost all rights to my children. I couldn't see them. I even lost notification rights.
Could I really quickly, let's talk about temporary orders real quick, because that sounds like illogical, first of all, because there's nothing temporary when you're dealing with children that are growing up, right? So it's not temporary that a child might not see the father for a year or two. That's actually child abuse that has lifelong repercussions.
Lifelong effects,
so on its face, this seems like it is titled in an incorrect way, in a way that is actually a lie.
Yeah, it comes from civil law, and a lot of people don't know, but family law cases are adjudicated under civil law, not criminal law. And under civil law, judges are allowed to make what are called temporary orders, which are designed to preserve equity between the parties until they get to a final judgment. Like if there's a dispute over some property, it prevents one party from for spoiling the property or selling the property or something like that until you get a judgment on the final lawsuit. That's what it's intended to do. But in practice, in family courts, these temporary orders have permanent effects. So if you think about it, it's been 3 years since I've seen my children because I've been blocked by these temporary orders. First of all, that time can never come back, and the developmental problems my children are going to have because of that can never be fixed. That's permanent. Mm-hmm. But also, really what the judges are trying to do is they use these temporary orders to delay out trials and just get your kids past 18 when it's not the judge's problem anymore. And they don't care if they have to hurt the kids to do that. And that's exactly what they did to my kids. In my case, the judge repeatedly violated Texas law. My judge's husband is actually a fact witness to events that are alleged in the pleadings in my case. Mm-hmm. And she's supposed to recuse, but she wouldn't do it. And I couldn't get an appellate court to get her to recuse. So they're willing to allow all these illegal acts by judges. What happened was eventually my ex realized that, because it took me 6 years, but I finally got a law passed in Texas that outlaws doctors from performing chemical or physical castration of minors. It took me 6 years in Texas, believe it or not. And the entire state of Texas turned on me. I mean, the entire legislature. I'm barred from so many legislators' offices because I got that law passed. The governor turned against me. The speaker of the House turned against me. The first time I went to Capitol Hill, even the lieutenant governor turned against me, but he later started helping me. But they turned against me completely in every way, even going so far as Republicans giving money to a Democratic judge to get her reelected so that she can continue to do this to my kids. Republicans actually supported my judge when she came up for reelection. So they were bound and determined to hurt my son. Well, when I got this law finally passed by just a massive uproar among conservatives, my ex-wife moved to California right before California's transgender kidnapping laws took effect. And I filed an emergency mandamus to the Texas Supreme Court to stop her from doing that. The Texas Supreme Court ruled against me, absurdly claiming that my child was no more at risk in California of chemical and physical castration than he was in Texas, where we had just outlawed the practice. So you can see that the judiciary, the executive branch, and the legislative branch all turned against me and my sons. And they were determined to make an example of me so that other fathers wouldn't fight. In addition, I ran for office in the state of Texas. I ran for House District 63. That includes Lower Denton County. Flower Mound is the largest city in there. It's where I used to live. And the governor put in over $1 million for my opponent. The Speaker of the House put in, I think, almost $2 million. And they worked really hard to keep me out of office because I fully intended to get this classified as child abuse, not just outlaw the physical procedures, but to classify it as child abuse. And to help these Republicans that wanted to keep me out of the primary, my judge enacted a gag order. And I'm still under that gag order, and it actually makes this podcast illegal. This is illegal. I'm not supposed to be talking to you. Wow. I have a ban until my children are 18 from doing any podcasts, writing any newspaper articles, writing any op-eds. Mm-hmm. I'm banned from talking about whether my sons are boys or girls. This is a totally illegal gag order, and that's another thing that family courts do. They exploit gag orders, and that's why most people don't know what's going on in family court, because most men are under gag orders and they're afraid to break them, and I'm just not.
So, like, you're definitely breaking your gag order right now. This gag order sounds like it is completely unconstitutional. It's an illegal gag order, but we know that these judges could care less about the Constitution. Again, you look at society that's falling apart, literally falling apart before our eyes,
Yes.
and you wonder why it's falling apart. And like, you have children being destroyed by courts, you have children being destroyed by the system. It's very obvious that there are some political parties that feel like children are the property of the government and they could do with them what they want, right? And you're saying that the damage to the children is not temporary, it's lifelong, the damage that they're doing to your children right now, but the order's temporary. So the whole thing just reeks of nonsense, right? How do you feel about the fact that, like, you might get a child back when he's 18, or you might have some custody, but you're going to be dealing with a child that literally the system and your ex-wife went to town on and destroyed this child's mental health? How do you feel about that fact?
Well, I'm outraged by it. And unfortunately, there's just no legal recourse against it. So what I'm preparing is to be there for my son when I get to see him again, and he can be with me and he can learn what it is to be a traditional man. I do believe that genetics predominates over environmental influences in character development. And so that's one bright spot, I think. My children are not genetically related to my ex-wife. We used an egg donor. And so those boys are going to grow up and be like me. They're not going to be like her, no matter what she really does to them. The only question
let me ask you on that topic.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, like, all the drugs that, like, your son's getting. I mean, tell me a little bit about that. How do you unwind that if, like, all of a sudden there's these feminization drugs? And I mean, tell me what. I'm curious what you're planning.
Well, here's the issue for me. As my judge illegally issued an order which says that I am not even allowed to be notified of any medical procedures. So I don't know what he's undergone. Here's what I do know. My ex-wife enrolled him in a gender clinic called the Genesis Clinic in Dallas, Texas, and the pediatric records with my son's pediatrician show that they intended to chemically castrate him at age 8 or 9. That's in writing in the medical records. I also know that when my son became unruly and refused to wear a dress to school, she died as a pediatrician, got him diagnosed with ADHD, put him on ADHD drugs to make him compliant to wear a dress. So those things, are going to require a lot of time and building good habits once he's 18 years old. So I'm pretty much planning financially, psychologically, logistically to take care of my son into his 30s.
Wow. So, man, that is like really heavy stuff. It sounds like from her actions, I mean, it sounds like, first of all, like she's playing a dictator to this child's health. You would think that it would be a conflict of interest for her to be the pediatrician of her own child, who she obviously has an agenda with, but nonetheless is the kind of nonsense that's permissible.
Yeah. What allows all this to happen? Some of this stuff may just sound unbelievable to some of your listeners, but here's the reason that it happens. We got no-fault divorce, under Ronald Reagan in California. In the early 1980s, a new program called Title IV-D was fully enacted by the federal bureaucracy. It's actually Title IV-D and Title IV-E together. Title IV-D provides for matching funds for the collection of child support in the states. Texas gets about $500 million in money from the federal government for the collection of child support. And that amount of money is based on two factors: how much child support you issue and how much you collect. The more child support you issue, the more money you get. So the states realized there were these massive financial incentives available from the federal government. And so all the states created family courts. Family courts didn't actually exist before the early 80s. People don't know that. These family courts were created by the states specifically to maximize Title IV-D reimbursements to the states. In Texas, we actually have that in statute. Courts are required to rule in such a way as to maximize Title IV-D reimbursements, not in the best interest of the child. So if you have two parents who are divorced, who are equally raising children, you don't have any child support. and the state loses money. So the state has a massive financial incentive to ensure that only one parent has the child. And in fact, in almost all the states, you'll find that the standard possession schedule specified by statute is the one that creates the maximum amount of child support paid, which creates the maximum amount of reimbursements to the states. And that's the financial incentive behind it. So the reason that no judge is ever going to give 50-50 custody, or in very rare cases, is because it literally cuts money out of the state's budget. Title IV-E is a program that provides reimbursements when CPS, Child Protective Services, take a child from an abusive home and adopts that child out. And what happens in Texas is you'll get a small CPS satellite office running low on budget, and they'll go look for a child that's under 18 months, no diseases, from low IQ and poor parents, white preferably, and they will take that baby from the parents and adopt it out, and they get, a couple $100,000 for their budget. So there's actually incentives for the state to take children from poor parents. And this is the reason, I got put on supervised visitation, for example. And I got put on supervised visitation in late July, early August. That's no accident. If you go and look at the family courts, they'll start putting men on supervised visitation in July, August, and September, because there's a federal grant program that is given directly to the counties for every single man on supervised visitation. So they maximize their supervised visitation count and get money for their county budgets. So there are just these massive financial incentives for courts to do the wrong things and to rip fathers out of their children's lives. And the statistics in both the UK, Australia, and the United States are roughly similar. Canada too. 40% of fathers after 2 years lose all contact with their children, and 60% of fathers after 4 years lose all contact with their children. And that's a direct result of judges following the money instead of following what's good for children.
I mean, the whole thing about best interest of the children, I mean, that is an obvious fallacy. We've seen it time and time again. But the thing that's really shocking to me, let's get into this idea of Title 4D. I always thought that Title 4D was done under the Clintons, but could you tell us a little bit more about how that happened?
Yeah, so the Title 4D program was actually passed by a Democrat Congress and signed into law by Republican Gerald Ford. It wasn't fully implemented in the agencies until Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is the one that directed the agencies to start giving maximum disbursements to the states.
Wow. And that had a direct effect on the amount of, divorces, no-fault divorces, children being separated from their fathers.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're talking about, imagine it's $500 million in Texas. Now imagine all the 50 states. You're talking about a program that's larger than the largest defense programs.
Wow.
And I don't know if
we see how that plays out.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, in terms of defense programs, it seems like, everybody knows now, we haven't had a justified war since like World War II. It seems as though we get into these conflicts for the sake of the military industrial complex. So you're telling me, let's call it the judicial industrial complex, or the family law industrial complex. You're saying that the exact same thing is happening here, but there's more financial incentives. So we've seen how the military industrial complex misbehaves and starts fake wars. And you're telling me there's more money in separating children from their parents.
Yeah, this is a program that's about the total reimbursements to the state that's right up there with the F-35 program, the most expensive defense program in the history of the United States. And let me tell you, back in the 1980s, when I was in the Marine Corps, the Department of Defense was trying to figure out a way to get rid of the Army Heavy Division concept, which was designed to fight wars in Europe, because it's completely not deployable. If you recall, in both Gulf Wars, it took over a year to deploy these Army divisions. That's how slow they are to deploy. Whereas the Marine Corps can deploy in 48 hours. Literally, that's a huge difference, right? And it's because the Marine doesn't operate under this heavy Army division concept, which was actually designed to provide lots of money to defense companies. And to this day, they were trying to get rid of it when I was in the Marine Corps in the 1980s. And to this day, we're still operating under the Army Heavy Division concept, Literally none of these defense programs ever go away, no matter what happens. They're too politically powerful. They represent too many jobs in the states. And the exact same thing plays out with Title 4D. So, for example, in Texas, almost the entire budget of the Texas Attorney General comes from Title 4D reimbursements. That means the state, when it gives money to the Texas Attorney General's office, that money can be used for other purposes, and it pays for the salaries of all the lawyers in the Texas Attorney General's office. You start talking about doing 50-50 custody and divorces, and you're talking about lawyers thinking about losing their jobs in the most powerful agencies in the Texas government. And that dynamic plays out in all the states. These people are not going to let these programs go. Until we change the financial incentives, you'll never change anything in family law.
I mean, how does this even make sense? Okay, I understand, like, people got to get paid, systems have to run, right? But you are literally setting fire to your own country. You are destroying your own country. We are seeing the fruits of that destruction right now. Most people don't think America's going to survive past 2024. I mean, that's, after having interviewed almost 200 experts on the topic, that's really what we keep hearing, is that America is dying. And America is dying because the family has died.
Yes.
The family has been destroyed. How does this make sense to literally pour fuel onto your culture and country and set it ablaze?
It really comes down to people doing things for money. It's a bag of silver, man. A lot of people don't know, for example, the transgender movement. I'll use that as an example. The transgender movement was not started by Democrats. It was actually originally funded by the largest Republican donors. Let me say that again. The transgender movement was founded and funded by Republican donors.
I remember you saying that last time we spoke. That is absolutely mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're telling me that the Republicans, from the sound of it, they're 100% cool with what's happening. And I'm sure,
yes.
Tell me about your journey. And I know you were trying to get a hold of people in Congress, people in the Senate, the Trump family. Tell me about how those agendas played out for you, sir.
Well, listen, the governor was really beside himself. He did not know how to handle this because, and this is a microcosm of the war that's being fought in the Republican Party right now. You basically have a super far left donor class and a super conservative voter class. And here's how, in the states in particular, but also at the federal level, here's how the Republican politicians make this work. So look at the transgender bill that we passed in Texas. This bill outlaws doctors from performing medical procedures on children and administering certain drugs. But what it does not do is classify it as child abuse. That means that, like the gender clinics in Colorado right now are running ads in Texas saying, we'll give you first-class flights to Colorado, you'll stay in a 5-star hotel, we'll castrate your child, and then we'll give you first-class flights back to Texas. So Texas parents are just taking their kids into other states and doing this. If we declared it as child abuse, those parents would not be able to do that. Okay, so the compromise that the donor class struck in the conservative states is write a bill that, that prohibits the medical procedures, but lets people go to the liberal states to do it. And that's the compromise the donors wanted. So what happens is the governor or lieutenant governor, speaker of the House, whoever, will come and say, aren't we great? Aren't we so conservative? We just outlawed, transgender procedures on kids, full well knowing that it didn't protect a single kid. So they play this bait and switch where they pass laws with loopholes. And they can tell their conservatives with a straight face that they passed a conservative law. And the left-wing donor class of the Republican Party stays happy and keeps giving them money because it has those loopholes. Same thing with abortion. Let me give you an example with abortion. So everybody says Texas outlawed abortion, right? Well, here's the thing. Texas didn't pass that law until almost all abortions were chemical. So the same thing. Wow. The law prohibits doctors from performing abortion procedures, but it's still legal for a mother to perform an abortion on herself using chemical drugs. And that's 97% of all abortions. So they can go to their, so the politicians in Texas go out to their constituents and say, aren't we so conservative? We outlawed abortion. We stopped the killing of babies. Full well knowing that they didn't stop a single abortion in the state of Texas. That's how they play
Wow.
it. So they please the donor class with loopholes, and they pass bills that look conservative and have no effect.
So they're trying to please their conservative audience by basically fake. I mean, they're passing real laws, but it's kind of fake sincerity, you could say. And then they're really playing to the donor class,
Yes.
Let's talk. Well, before we talk about the donor class, because I recall in our conversation, you had some very interesting things to say about who that donor class is and why they're doing certain things. But let's go back to the Republican Party. Now, you started to say about how you were talking to these politicians. Did you try approaching the Trump family? And if so, what was the result there? Could you tell us a little bit about, because that's the head of the Republican Party. Could you tell us a little bit about the reactions you got there?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, the Trump people are very polite and, actually hooked me up with some lawyers and other things that helped. But the bottom line is, Trump is very pro-LGBT. And, he's had LGBT events at Mar-a-Lago. Carrie Lake is actually very pro-LGBT, and I actually like Carrie Lake. I've met her personally and shook her hand, given her a hug. I like her.
Could I make a real quick question? I got a real quick question here. Now, you could be pro-LGBTQ, or you could be agnostic about the topic, right? Still, that's a big leap. And I'm talking about conversations I've had with trans individuals that say, you know what, until the child's 18, leave them the hell alone. Like, there's no reason why a 5-year-old, 2-year-old, 8-year-old, before they've even discovered their sexual identity, has to be castrated based upon the whims and opinion of somebody else. So it seems as though even the LGBTQ community is against that, right? So there are a lot of gray areas there. Doesn't mean that just because you're pro-LGBTQ, they're like, chop the 5-year-old's penis off.
Yeah, like some of the people who supported me most in Texas were from the LGBT community. So you may not know this about me, but this came up in my campaign when I ran for office, and conservatives were very shocked about it. But I had people, trans supporters show up and call me homophobe and all this stuff. Well, I've been in the Marine Corps and the Army both. And when I was in the Army, I was at the Airborne School, headquarters, United States Army Airborne School. And there was a cook there who was discharged for being gay. Back then, you were discharged for it. But what pissed me off was they gave him a dishonorable discharge. And that's one of the worst things that can happen to you in America. It's worse than a federal murder conviction. I can tell you that right now. You'll never be able to have a federal job. You're permanently ineligible for all federal benefits. The only one you get is Social Security. You can never rent an apartment or a house. You can't have any licensure in any state or in the federal government. You can't become a plumber or anything like that. You're not eligible for any education benefits. Whereas if you were a federal prisoner convicted of murder and you get out of jail, you get all these benefits for education stuff. So it basically ruined this guy's life for off-base activity. I led a protest off-base against this. I thought this was terribly unjust, and I thought that it, in many ways, cheapened the dishonorable discharge, which is for people who are cowards in battle or who kill or rape non-combatants. That's what the dishonorable discharge is for. So I led a protest. At one point, I walked across the street and dumped some trash in a dumpster on the base side of the street. And on that basis, they said that I led a protest on base, and they discharged me for that. So I spent time in jail standing up for fairness for a gay man, and I don't even believe in this stuff. I just don't want the government mistreating people. So I'm not anti-LGBT in the slightest. I believe in a free country. I would like us not to promote it to children, but it's a free country. So when people would say, Jeff, you're a homophobe or transphobe, I say, hey, I've been to jail for fairness to gay people. Have you been to jail? I was in a military jail at hard labor because I just thought it was unjust. So I put my money where my mouth is. Have you done it? So you're right about that. Not all LGBT people think this should be done to kids. What happens though is there is a leftist ideology. It's not really an LGBT ideology. It's a leftist ideology. And it just so happens that most LGBT people are leftists. In this leftist ideology, they have basically changed sex and sexuality from a behavior into a status. So if you think about what we did with gay rights, we said well, people are gay as though that's a status they have rather than a behavior they engage in. And on the basis of it being a status, we can attach rights to it. So we can talk about gay rights, right? Trans was the same way. They said trans is not a behavior, it's not cross-dressing. It's a status, it's something that you are as a human being. And on that basis, they attached rights to it. Under this view that sexuality and sexual behavior is a status rather than a behavior, what you have is a situation where it becomes a total part of your identity. So now think about children who have no sexual identity. They don't develop a sexual identity until they're teens, right? From this sort of twisted leftist point of view, that means the child has no human identity because it has no sexual identity. And they've basically defined human identity as a sexual identity. So they believe they're being benevolent to children by giving them a sexual identity. They're making them human. They're making them more human by giving them a sexual identity. And that's the point of view that they're coming at this from. That's what we're really fighting. We're fighting an ideology that wants to turn behaviors into a status, an ontological fact.
Wow. Just so twisted, so twisted.
Very
Let's talk a little bit about, so, it seems like you didn't get much help from the Trump family in terms of actual tangible help to stop what they're doing.
No.
Let's talk a little bit about the donor class, because what we often see is that we the people could want all that we want, and they pretend sometimes to be doing what we want, but it seems as though they're really playing for the donor class. Tell us a little bit about who that donor class is and what their agenda is.
So when people talk about the uniparty, what they're really talking about are the moneyed interests that run the parties. Those are the people that actually run the United States. There's a lot of overlap between this uniparty and academia and political groups like the Israel lobby, for example. There's a lot of overlap there. But what this uniparty, this donor class is about is adopting a form of expressive individualism as a basis for the society, essentially demoralizing society to give maximum freedom to citizens, while at the same time dispossessing them of their material wealth. And I think the basic concept here is we're going to take things from you. You're going to become a renter, not an owner in your own country. But we're going to open up society and give you the ability to do all these sensual things that you've always wanted to do. Sexual things, spectacle, even, believe it or not, organized sports fit into this. If you go back and read, a book by H.G. Wells, called The Open Conspiracy, which was written at the turn of the 20th century, he makes a lot of predictions about what the globalists are going to do. And one of them, he said, they're going to turn children's games into large organized spectacles. You'll be watching children's games in stadiums. And everybody laughed at him. And he said, the kind of idea here is to replace a government-controlled tribalism for your natural nationalist instincts, and it's to get rid of nationalist ideas. That kind of thinking is what's going into what the donor class is doing. They have a direction that they want to take the United States in. They have to take control of the political parties in order to maintain some semblance that the people are in control through voting. But we know that elected officials are not in control of the government. And that's very easy to see. If some of your audience is skeptical of that, I just point out a couple of things. President Trump ordered all U.S. troops out of Syria. He did that 3 times. And all 3 times, the Department of Defense disobeyed his orders and refused to do it. So we know that the president is not in control of the military. If you're old enough to remember the Iran-Contra affair, one of the things that I took away from it, if you don't know what that is, that's where the U.S. intelligence services sold drugs in Mexico, large quantities of drugs, Colombian drugs, and sold them in Mexico to get money to buy weapons from Iran in order to supply a revolution in Nicaragua. And that selling of Colombian drugs into Mexico is actually what created the cartels in Mexico. One of the reasons that the Zeta cartel, which were all former special forces operators in Mexico, it's because those special forces operators were working with the CIA in order to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. And so the United States created the drug cartels through this thing. But the biggest thing I took away from it, though, was that they were laundering the money at a bank called BCCI, which still exists in Florida. And it turned out this bank was owned by a CIA shell company and Saudi Arabia jointly. And that's when I realized the intelligence agencies own businesses. They own banks. And so they have an independent source of money that doesn't come from the Congress. So the Congress's power of the purse, the check and balance in the Constitution, has no effect on the intelligence agencies. They have their own supplies of money that they don't have to report to Congress, and they don't. So we have this kind of imbalance in the country where we have the civilians are not in control of the government. I told you the president's not in control of the military. That's obvious. The president is also not in control of the agencies. The agencies do whatever they want. I'll never forget the EPA going to Congress saying, if you don't do something about carbon emissions, we're going to have to. Well, who's in charge here? The Congress that makes laws or the agency? The agencies tell Congress what to do all the time. So the agencies run things, and the intelligence agencies operate as a separate branch of government, completely independent even from the financial constraints of the federal budget. So these are the people that we call the deep state, and these are the main instrument of power of the political donor class.
Wow. And you're saying that basically our president is just like a figurehead, more or less. Who is calling the shots? Who is controlling the military? Who is having final say with those matters?
Well, it's not clear. And I don't even think, even among the government agencies in the United States, that there's general agreement on policy. I mean, never forget, it was the NSA that brought evidence of the Russia dossier hoax to Trump. That tells you that there's some feud between the NSA and the CIA. And the CIA and the FBI are the ones who created that hoax dossier. Wow. So there's not even necessarily agreement among these power centers. But largely it's unelected bureaucrats, people who are protected by the civil service laws and who have the power of large budgets. And those are the people that really run the United States. In fact, the best way to describe our government now is not by reference to the Constitution. So a lot of people don't know this, but the whole concept behind the development of the government agencies was to undermine the separation of powers in the Constitution. And we don't have to surmise that. Both Wilson and FDR had members of their administration literally write books that that's what they were going to do. So if you look at, let's take the IRS, for example. It's not unusual in this way. It's not unusually oppressive in this way, but it's more illustrative because most people know about the IRS. So let's say that John Doe is accused of a tax crime. A IRS special agent, whenever you hear a special agent, it just means they can carry a gun. So an IRS special agent will charge John Doe with a tax crime. John Doe will not be charged under laws passed by the United States Congress and signed by the president. John Doe will be charged under regulations that were written by the IRS. John Doe will be denied a jury trial, and he will be tried in an IRS court by an IRS judge who's paid by the IRS. And if John Doe is willing to pursue it long enough, I think the average time now is 18 years, you can eventually get to federal court and get a jury trial. Most people can't afford it, can't do it. But you see what I'm saying. The IRS has executive authority to charge people with crimes and investigate them. It has legislative authority to determine what the crimes are. And it has judicial authority to prosecute people under the regulations that they've written. And that's true of all the independent agencies. And they were intentionally created by FDR to have all three powers of government in one body. So whenever you hear it's an independent government agency, independent means it's independent of control of the people. There's nothing that the agency has to do to reference anything in the Congress or anywhere else. It can do pretty much what it wants. That's why people say, well, why does the Department of Education have 10 SWAT teams? Because it's an independent agency and it has executive authority and it has policing power. And so they have SWAT teams to execute their policing power. So a lot of people don't understand this. When you deal with somebody in a government agency, you are not dealing with an equal. This isn't a government citizen that just happens to work for the government. When you deal in the agencies, these people have the status of what's called administrative judges. So we have federal judges in the federal government, but we also have administrative judges. These are people who have the power of judicial power within government agencies. And they are the ones who really make all the decisions about how the agency works, how to interpret the regulations, and how they're going to be applied to citizens. So if you look at how we're actually ruled, we really live in a critarchy, which means rule by judges. We're ruled by tribunals in agencies. And the question is, who do these tribunals serve? And the answer is they serve rich moneyed interests. Because we know from public choice theory and analysis of the US economy that all of the government agencies eventually become controlled by the rich moneyed interests that they're supposed to regulate. So the Department of Energy becomes dominated and controlled by the energy companies. The energy companies write all the laws. Obamacare was actually written by the insurance companies. It wasn't written by regulators. That's why it caused insurance rates to skyrocket to benefit the insurance companies. So what we have is a critarchy in service to a plutocracy ruled by the rich. America is a country that is ruled by state capitalism, enforced by administrative judges. That's the country you actually live in.
It seems as though what we're talking about really is, I've done a lot of research on the effect of the BAR, the British Accreditation Registry, onto our country and government, right? It seems as though a lot of the tyranny that they were trying to impose on us, and I mean the British in the 1700s, it seems as though that level of tyranny actually invaded us through the courts. Now, if you can dissect what happened there, because the Constitution is one thing, and what you're talking about is something like very much akin to what was happening with the royals, akin to what was happening with the British government trying to subject their people to tyranny. Tell me, how did we get to this point?
Well, it's a template. You're right to compare it to the British mercantilist system. What do we mean by mercantilism? Mercantilism is just a country that's owned by plutocrats and is run as a business for profit. It's not there to protect the rights of citizens, but rather to earn a profit. The way the English organized their colonies was actually through corporations. So you had the East India Company. You had a number of companies that had rights to Virginia and all the tobacco farming there and all that. So everything in the British colonial system was governed by corporations. After the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812 was fought specifically to attempt to establish a national bank in America, which was opposed by the citizens because they knew what it would bring with them. It would bring the English corporate system of government with them. Excuse me. So they attempted to establish a first national bank under, I believe it was Jefferson. Jefferson put it down. Then they tried to establish a second national bank. Andrew Jackson put that one down. Then they tried to assassinate him. He took the bullets and then wound up, I think, killing his assassin with his cane. Tough son of a bitch. We didn't get another attempt to establish a national bank until World War I. A lot of people don't really understand the motivation behind the establishment of the Fed. It was originally for war funding purposes. Prior to World War II, we had in the United States what's called the regimental system. So if the United States government wanted to go to war outside of the country, it had to get the states to deliver regiments to it in order to go fight the war. You had to get the manpower from the states. Well, World War I was a spectacularly unpopular war. At that time and still today, the largest ethnic group in the country are Germans. German Americans are the largest single ethnic group in the United States. And they weren't in favor of going over there and fighting interests for Britain either, because we were still, still had the Revolutionary War fervor until the mid 20th century. And so what happened was the Fed was established in order to print the money to pay for the war that the states weren't willing to pay for. And after World War I, we converted to a brigade system where the federal government could mobilize troops without permission from the states. So there was an extreme loss of freedom from that. But the Federal Reserve is an interesting entity. I remember, amusingly, Ron Paul used to love to ask questions of Ben Bernanke. And it was a blood sport, and I used to really enjoy it when he would question him in committee. And I remember one time he asked Ben Bernanke, who was chairman of the Fed at the time, he said, "Is the Fed a private bank?" And Ben Bernanke thought for a second. He said, "No, it's not a private bank." And he said, "Okay, is the Fed a government entity? Is it a government agency?" And he thought about it and he said, "No, it's not a government entity either." And then Ron Paul clarified, and he said, "So you're telling me that the Fed is neither a private nor a public entity?" And Bernanke said, "Yeah, that's right." So it has some unique status. It's neither public nor private. And what effectively that means is it's not subject to private regulation under the laws that govern banking. So there's no, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the SEC can't audit the Fed because it's not a private entity. But it's also not subject to the Inspector General laws in the public sphere because it's not a public entity, and it operates essentially in a completely lawless way.
Wow. And how come, what were our politicians thinking that they even allowed this to happen? I get the idea of temporary solutions for funding of World War I. Seems as though a lot of bad things started in World War I, including the current crisis with the world potentially going into world war because of Israel-Palestine and seeds that were planted in World War I. So World War I seems to have been the start of a lot of bad things. Tell me how this was even allowed to happen and stay permanent within our country.
Well, you had a group of elites, guys like Wilson. If you're interested in learning more about this, one of my old professors, Donald Pastrito, has written several good books about the progressives, and you should read them. And he has one book in which all he does is present the writings of the progressives themselves in the pre and post World War I period. And what you find out is that guys like Wilson are a product of the Bronze Age in America. We really didn't have super wealthy people until the Bronze Age with industrialization in the late 1800s. And for these people, some of them, Harvard was even not good enough for their kids. They wanted their kids to have a European education. And so Wilson was actually educated at the Sorbonne, which was the hotbed of communism and socialism. And he came back to the United States dedicated to creating a kind of progressive welfare state in the United States. And he essentially failed in that. But when FDR was elected, he used the Great Depression to pick up Wilson's program, and he completed it and succeeded and almost completely undermined constitutional authority in the United States. And it was done under the auspices of crisis, and it created these agency entities which FDR had hoped would function as the permanent civil service class in England. But instead, they took on a tyrannical character because they had no limits on their authority.
Wow. So, all right. One thing I wanted to touch upon is when you're talking about the Iran-Contra situation, you're talking about drugs being sold in Mexico. Do you believe that part of Iran-Contra was actually bringing crack cocaine into the black neighborhoods in the early 80s? Because what we've done is we've done a lot of episodes on that particular topic about how in the 1970s, there was no guns, there was no drugs. You looked at neighborhoods like Watson, Compton, you had green lawns, and then all of a sudden in the early 80s, there was an influx, like a massive dramatic influx of guns and crack cocaine. What do you think happened there?
So this is one thing which I tell a lot of my friends on the right. For some of them, it's not a popular thing to say. But you have to, if you're a white guy in America, you have to really care about what happens to black people in this country. Because most of these propaganda and social propaganda programs are tested in the black community first. The fentanyl crisis is using the same template that was used for crack cocaine in the black community. And look, here's the way that you can understand this. We can find a terrorist in the middle of Africa, in the middle of the desert, in a mud hut with no electronics. He has no electronics. He's sitting in a mud hut. We can bomb him in Africa. And you're telling me you can't interdict chemically detectable substances coming across the border? That's just not believable, right? It's the same thing with Antifa, right? You can have two white supremacists camping in a Mississippi forest around a campfire, totally alone, and they make a joke about spraying graffiti on a federal courthouse, and there'll be black helicopters, and they'll be arrested at dawn, right? But somehow you can't find 5,000 Antifa organizing in Seattle or Portland. It's just not believable. So, I definitely think that the intelligence agencies worked to test the effectiveness of drugs on social cohesion in the black community. And they found that it was very destructive of social cohesion. They also implemented the first welfare programs among black families were all oriented to remove the father from the home.
Yeah.
Right. So the financial incentives are such that if there's a father in the home, they actually deny welfare to children, poor children. So they're incentivizing women to have no fathers in the home. And that was tested in the black community first, and then Title 4D was rolled out to whites.
Yeah.
So you have to care what's happening to your fellow citizens, because eventually it's going to come back to you.
I've been seeing this crack cocaine gun, the gun trains. They call it the cocaine trains and the gun trains, because we did an episode very early on in the history of this channel, America Happens. This was back in 2007. We actually went to Watson Compton and interviewed a lot of old timers, and they claimed that trains would literally show up in the middle of the night, and then they would separate the lead cart from the actual carriage cart, and they would leave that carriage cart. And if you know Watts, it's basically split by train tracks. You have one gang on the other side, the other gang, one on each side, Bloods and Crips. And then there'd be these carriages just sitting there for weeks, and then eventually kids would break into them and find guns, cocaine. That's actually what we were told. I mean, I wasn't there to verify this, but then you talk to individuals like Freeway Rick Ross, who have actually interviewed, who was the main crack cocaine dealer in those neighborhoods, and he claims that the CIA was involved in those transactions, that they actually brought the drugs over there. Then you have somebody like Gary Webb, who was an investigative journalist, and it's funny because the investigative journalists don't seem to have very long lives the minute they start talking about what the government's doing. And lo and behold, he committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head after releasing a book talking about how this was all orchestrated, right? Any thoughts on that topic?
Well, we have a long history in Mena, Arkansas. I personally know pilots who are running drugs for the intel agencies. We know for a fact they were running drugs in Vietnam, in South America for decades. So this isn't like some crazy out there thing. This is stuff that's in the public record. The other thing to remember is and I don't know if you've noticed, but wherever the United States goes to war, always a drug trade crops up afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, we go to Afghanistan and we get rid of the Taliban, and all of a sudden opium production completely resumes all over Afghanistan.
Wow.
And the first thing the Taliban does when it comes back to power is it eradicates all heroin production. There's no heroin production anywhere in Afghanistan now. In fact, I had friends of mine in the Marine Corps who were in Helmand province who said they spent 3 years guarding poppy fields for heroin producers. That's all they did.
Yep.
And
I ran for office, and I kept hearing stories like this where former Army were telling me, "Look, man, I'm embarrassed. I didn't realize I was a glorified, I was the henchman for drug dealers." And
that's right.
People are crushed that they would do service, that they would lose friends. to these wars. And it was really because, one example was a gentleman told me they were doing some very shady things in Yemen. And he knows that they're transporting drugs. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, and the reason is very simple. This is one of the extra congressional channels of money for the intelligence agencies. They sell these drugs and they make lots of money and they fund their operations from it. And they don't tell Congress about it. It's a pretty simple idea, right? Everywhere we go, the drug trade flourishes because this is how the intel agencies pay for their operations. So it's really just that simple. And it's not so far-fetched. I mean, people can simply go and find out, like, it's public record, congressional testimony that we were running drugs. The CIA was running drugs in South America, in Asia, all over the place. And wow. To think that it's just so gullible, I think, of a lot of conservatives. And, I'm a conservative, right? So, I'm actually probably way to the right now than I was before. But, how gullible can you be? You think that these intelligence agencies are going to subvert governments in other countries, but they're never going to do it in your country?
Yeah,
they're right here. They're right here. It's easy for them to do it. Of course they're going to do that.
For those of us that have actually read this, the minute January 6th happened, I started thinking, like, not what was it, 1953 Iran, how this was, it was very clear to me. And this isn't something that people talk about. They keep talking about the FBI. I guarantee you right now, history will show that the CIA was involved in January 6th because
no question.
What's up?
No question.
No question. But they don't talk about that. They keep saying FBI, FBI. Well, look, man, they had this thing perfected 60 years ago in Iran.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not going to do that same operation over here?
Of course they are. And, look, here's another easy way for anybody who's heavily propagandized to just sort of get their head around this. So if you look how they're finding all these people that they've accused on January 6th, they're doing it through photo recognition, AI photo recognition, right? They have video of people in the Capitol, and they're matching that up with driver's license photos and things like that. That's how they're finding these people. So, and many people may not know this, but, these techniques don't need to see your face. So we have programs that can measure the ratios of your limb lengths, which is unique for every individual. They can do gait analysis, like the rhythm and how you walk and how your bones move when you walk. And that's unique for every individual. Gait analysis alone is actually more accurate than facial analysis. So you've got this pipe bomber, on January 6th, who walked around planting these pipe bombs, never set them off. Somehow we have all this video of the pipe bomber, and they can't find this guy. They can find all these January 6th people through photo analysis and video analysis, but they can't find the pipe bomber by photo and video analysis. Again, it's just not believable.
How do you think, there's got to be good people at these agencies going, what the hell are we doing in this country? What's going on there? Is there people within these agencies trying to fix these issues, or are they just going along with this destruction of the country?
Look, let's take the CIA, for example. DIA does the same thing too, right? They have experts at recruiting spies, developing spies, and even getting spies to create new spy networks of their own, right? To become leaders of spies. They're experts at determining the right kind of people to do this. Of course, they're using the same techniques to determine who gets promoted into leadership positions in the intelligence agencies. If you're not a true believer, you're not going to move up into a position of power. And you'll never be in a position to have access to the information that you could pass on to Congress or to the American people. You'll never be able to leak it. The Snowden event was a real wake-up call because after 9/11, they had these fusion centers and they freed up access to this information, and they'll never do that again. They'll never make that mistake again. And what Snowden showed is pretty scary, right? They're collecting every phone call. They're collecting this podcast right now. They collect everything in Project Carnivore. And then later, if they think you might be a criminal, they can go find all your phone calls and listen to all your phone calls. They can do what's called parallel case construction, where It would be illegal for the FBI to get information about you or to subpoena certain information or to get a warrant, but they can look at the information in the intelligence agencies and then try to find legal ways to get the information they already know is there. That's called parallel case construction, and it's what's being used against the J6 people as well. So you'll never get to a position of power to be able to leak these things anymore. It's not going to happen. They're using the same techniques they used to recruit spies to promote in the organization.
Let's talk a little bit about Antifa. You told me some very interesting things about the history of Antifa emanating from Germany, actually pre-World War II, of Antifa being essentially a competing organization to the Nazis. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, an instructive thing to do is just to, go and Google, Weimar Communist Party headquarters, and you'll see a picture come up from Weimar, Germany, and on that building will be the current Antifa logo. They haven't even changed the logo. Flag's the same. The words on the flag's the same. The font's the same. Everything's the same. So, this is the thing. What happened was during the Weimar period, you had a competition between Nazis and communists. And people don't know, but the Nazis sold themselves as something called the third way. It was a way sort of in between. They positioned themselves actually as moderates between communism and fascism. That's why they call themselves National Socialism, national from fascism and socialism from communism. They were the middle way between the two. And the communists and the Nazis had street battles, like lethal street battles. What happened was the Nazis won, and we had World War II, and eventually the Russians, who really have the right to say they won World War II, maybe even more than the Western Allies, sweep into Germany and take over Eastern Germany. And Western Germany becomes controlled by the NATO countries. It's divided up into 5 areas. In the Soviet side, in East Germany, they created a kind of a communist youth. And that communist youth actually still existed in West Germany, right, from prior to World War II. And what they did is they created this Antifa organization as a lineage from the Communist Party of Germany, and ran it as a subversion group in West Germany. And it was run by the East German intelligence, the Stasi. After the wall came down in 1989 and the Germany's united, the German intelligence services were merged. And the German intelligence continued to run Antifa and then expanded it out to other European countries and used it as a way to influence policy in other European countries. Antifa was actually operating in the UK and France, in the late 80s and early 90s. And they were operating here in the United States as well in the late 80s. I used to be a bouncer down in Houston in my misspent youth, when I got out of the military. And one of my main jobs was to kick skinheads out of bars because they would tear bars up and scare away patrons. And as soon as you kick all the skinheads out, all the Antifa people would come in, and you'd have to kick all of them out. And they were a very active group. They used the same flag and logo as the Weimar Communist Party headquarters. During the Antifa riots during the Trump presidency, when they were literally burning our cities down, there was a famous incident where Trump attempted to call the president of Germany, who was then Angela Merkel. And she refused to take his call. And this made world news, right? Because, the German president is snubbing the president of the United States. But the reason he was calling is because they run Antifa. And all of that Antifa subversion was happening in the United States, was run by German intelligence to subvert the Trump presidency.
Wow. That is absolutely mind-blowing.
The other thing to know about Antifa, and this will tell you a lot about where you live, okay, for your audience. If you see Antifa operating where you live, Antifa has a very strict doctrine. They're very organized, and they have an operational doctrine that they follow. And one of the doctrines they follow is they only operate in permissive environments. So if you've got Antifa operating in your city, that means that the city police are allowing it, intentionally allowing it, and have assented to them operating there. It means your county sheriff did. It means your state police assented to it, and it means the FBI assented to it. They will not operate unless they have a permissive environment. So the FBI essentially allowed Antifa to burn our cities down, and they did it on purpose to undermine Trump.
Wow. Wow. So, all right. Let's talk a little bit about the future. I mean, you had some analysis as to what the globalists, what the World Economic Forum, the UN want for our future to be, and which direction not only they, but our politicians, or two-faced politicians, are pushing us towards.
Well, in the short term, they're going to try to get rid of rural communities. That's why you're seeing this big assault on farmers, and you see these big protests in Germany right now with the German farmers. They're trying to put all the farms out of business. In America, they want to put all the farmers and ranchers out of business. You've now got all these WEF billionaires buying up all the farmland and ranch land, so you can't produce on these lands. Biden signed a huge agreement with an African nation, Namibia, for the importation of beef. And at the same time, the Department of Agriculture is now telling ranchers all over America, and it's pretty controversial here in Texas, to kill their beef stocks. So we're killing beef from American beef producers to import meat from Africa. Why is this happening? Well, the whole concept behind the deindustrialization of the United States, where we moved most of our manufacturing capability to China, which happened in the 80s and early 90s, the reason that we did that was to reduce the power of the American electorate. The American worker, because we were the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, had so much authority and power over what got produced, how it got produced, whether it would be produced. They wanted to take that American worker out of the political equation, so they moved it to China. And it became a mechanism of control over American workers, because suddenly all American workers now are competing with a global labor pool. They're not just competing with other Americans for jobs. And this reduces the political and economic power of American citizens. And a similar thing is about to happen with food. They're going to outsource all food production, so the United States and Europe will be dependent on the third world for food, which will reduce the political power of Western and American populations.
Wow. Wow. All right. So now let's talk about where you think it's going to go based upon, like, what do you think is coming down the pipeline in 2024? Do you think there's actually a way forward through this tyranny, towards our constitutional values? Is this country lost? I mean, I got to tell you, I went to some men's gatherings recently at a church, and most of the dialogue that's coming out is pretty much this country is over. People are very hopeless, and they're talking about starting, new communities, new cities out of the system as a way to escape what's coming down the pipeline. What do you think is coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, that's the Benedict option. It's the idea that Benedictine monasteries are what preserved all of the classical learning during the Dark Ages. And, the Bible, all of the classical Greek books and so forth were all preserved by monasteries. And the idea is that you go to some secluded area and you kind of create your own place. If you look in South Africa, there's a community called Orania. And Orania has absolutely done that in South Africa in preparation for the inevitable collapse of the South African society. And I think that's a viable way of thinking about it. Other alternatives are pretty limited. Like I said, we're ruled by a critarchy in service to a plutocracy. So rich people are using judges to rule over us. There's not a lot of place to go in the law. There's no legal recourse. Electing people won't change anything. We know that we can change who's in the government. It doesn't change the policies. So dropping out of the system is probably ought to be your best bet. I don't think in 2024 they're going to let us have an election. I was saying that all last year. They can't even take a chance that Trump would be elected again. Trump would do so much damage to the deep state at this point. I think it's actually personal with Trump. I don't think they could talk him out of it or bribe him out of it.
Mm.
It's personal for him. That's one of the reasons I would like to see somebody like RFK Jr. for Attorney General, because I think it's personal for him. He knows the deep state killed a family member of his.
Multiple
And,
family members, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think he's also, I think, a rule follower.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some Zionist tendencies, which I don't like, but I think he would go after the deep state. That they can't let that happen. They can't even take a chance that would happen. If you look at the war games that they were running all in 2023, which is where I got this idea from, they've been doing simulations of cyber attacks that take down elections. And usually when you see DIA and CIA participating together in joint drills, it's because they intend to actually do what they're doing. They're actually not doing a drill against it. They're actually learning how to do it.
I mean, we've all been told, we've been told that to expect some kind of like an EMP attack, everything is going to go down. Anything that's computerized, which, by the way, there was an Obama produced film made on Netflix where essentially it's an EMP attack. And so the viewers know what that entails. I mean, any car after like mid 90s has a computerized system. Everything's computerized. So if an EMP attack happens, everything stops working. Your cell phone stops working, your phone stops, your car stops working, and really society stops. People should watch that Obama documentary, talk about something that, could be predicting the future. So that's the thing that we keep hearing. And that sounds like society will stop. It sounds like it's very much in line with stopping the 24 election. We've also heard things like, it's almost guaranteed that they're going to try to assassinate Donald Trump, and they're going to blame it on like Hezbollah or Hamas, some terrorist, and kind of use that as a way of putting somebody like a Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis into power.
Yeah, and there's constitutional chicanery. If they can block the election, the House of Representatives will pick the president, and they'll pick a deep state president. So when you talk about an EMP attack, I think something that's important for your audience to know is, if you're in a city and electricity is lost, you're going to die. It's a non-survivable event. Millions of people will die in cities without electricity. I don't think a lot of people understand, their water supply and all the things that are required in a city to survive in that kind of population density. An EMP attack would be extremely serious. Now, we've had a state senator, Bob Hall, here in Texas, who has, for the last 10 years, been trying to get Texas to harden its grid against EMP attack. And we have the technology to do it. It's not very expensive either. And it gets blocked by the Republican donor establishment every time he tries to do it. He cannot get that bill passed.
Wow. I mean,
how the electrical infrastructure vulnerable?
And it seems like we're a captured nation, more or less. I mean, we're already captured, it seems like, by a corporate elite, which, again, you get into this idea of lobbies, you get into this idea of big money, all things that should not be in our politics if this politics is about we the people, because then that becomes we the elite.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
All right. So, Jeff, this has been a fantastic episode. Is there any topics we didn't touch upon that is important to discuss before we close it off?
Yeah. I mean, as we look ahead, I ask myself, like, what is the most important skill or activity or practice as a citizen that our people are going to need as we face up to reality crashing down on the house of cards that's been built by these global elites. And I think the most important thing is to be able to be resistant to propaganda. And unfortunately, guys on our side are not super good at that. The traditional normie person on the right, even moderate leftists who might be on our side on some of this stuff, they're not very good at understanding and seeing propaganda. So I would just encourage your audience to do some reading on propaganda, how to spot it. It's not critical thinking. It's Basically, like you can use your common sense and see these things. Pretty much disbelieve everything you see in the media. Just disbelieve it and think through yourself what would have to be true if their claims are true. And to do that, you're going to have to challenge some of your assumptions about how the country's run, your relationship to law enforcement, your relationship to your local and city governments. But if you do that, I think you have a much better chance of making a positive impact as we go through some of the trials that are coming up in 2024, because you won't be as fooled and you won't act as foolishly.
Wow, wow. You know, one of the things I do want to mention on that topic is we've done a lot of different episodes on fifth generation warfare, which is what you're really talking about, is fifth
Yes.
generation warfare. We actually
Yes.
had General Flynn on. We've interviewed Boone Cutler. Everybody knows General Flynn. Boone Cutler was very high up in intelligence. We've interviewed a lot of folks like that, and they say fifth generation warfare is what's happening. It's propagandist. It's propaganda-based warfare. It is used to essentially conduct war on your mind, which is exactly what's happening. It comes from individuals that want communism in our country, which is basically explains the entire mainstream media complex.
Yes.
It explains everything that is going on around us. It explains why the NBA is kowtowing to China. It just explains a whole lot of things as far as what the World Economic Forum is doing, what the UN is doing, right? So something that we got to keep an eye out is for fifth generation warfare. I believe it was episode 191 with General Flynn, where he explains what is going on. And I highly recommend people watch that episode because Jeff, what he's talking about is exactly fifth generation warfare. Jeff, is there anything else worth mentioning before we wrap it up?
That's it, my friend. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Man, it's been a pleasure. We've been wanting to get Jeff on for a while because, you know, talk about somebody that's really seeing the crux of the tyranny that's happening via what's happening with his son, James. You know, one last question, Jeff. You know, you were talking about you want to take care of James till he's about 30 years old. You're seeing a lot of damage that your ex-wife is doing right now, a lot of mental health damage, right? Is there a time when James sues everybody that did this to him? I mean, he seems like the best candidate to literally carpet bomb all these scumbags that used him as a child, used his vulnerability as a child for their own disgusting agendas. Is there a time that happens, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to sue on his behalf. One of the things the courts did is they took away my ability to sue on his behalf. So I haven't been able to bring lawsuits, and they did that on purpose.
Wow.
But I expect, but I got to tell you, my basic belief about the judiciary is that America has one of the most corrupt judiciaries in the world. I think it's more corrupt than places like Iran and Russia, actually. I mean, if you just look at what the judges have done with Trump, what the judges have done with the January 6th defendants, you can understand if family court is actually worse than that, how bad it actually is and what your chances are of actually getting off a successful lawsuit. What I'm going to focus on with my sons, and this is a basic belief that I have, you basically are what your habits are. You don't have an innate, you have a genetic potential, but your habits are what express that potential. And you can change your habits. And I'll work with my son to institute in him good and manly habits so that when he's 30, he's morally educatable. I don't believe people are even morally educatable until they're about 30.
Wow.
Actually, I don't think people should even go to college till after 30. Until you've lived, lost, loved, and lost, this education is just wasted on the young.
Yeah.
So 30, I picked 30 for a reason. About 30, you're educatable. And my goal will just be to get him really good habits and emotional control so that when he starts learning wisdom and starts developing an intellectual way of thinking about the world, he'll be prepared to do the right thing.
Wow. A lot of wisdom, man. And it's sad that our judges are such corrupt individuals that are literally financing the destruction of children, where this kind of wisdom is ignored. But A woman who wants to cut off the penis of her son at 4 or 5 years old is something that is upheld. I mean, it's just disgusting in every term of the word disgusting. So, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on to this episode of Blood Money. Seems like my camera is tweaking out. It happens once in a while. So I'll just wrap it up. Thank you so much, viewers, for joining us for this episode. Make sure you check out AmericaHappens.com. Make sure you drop your email at AmericaHappens.com so you're subscribed to our channel so we don't lose contact regardless of what comes down the pipeline. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and I will see you on the next episode of Blood Money. Take care.